It hadn't been long since Nate became the manager at the office, but he immediately decided to break the way of things there. The first thing he did was cut the salaries, of course bypassing his own. As greedy as he was, he cut the salaries of almost all of the staff. Many submitted their resignation letters almost the same day. Those who remained didn't mind quitting either, but the lack of other immediate options forced them to endure the antics of the tyrant. Almost half of the staff was now gone. Nate explained that some of the positions were useless and repetitive. Those who stayed ended up getting twice as much workload. As a result, they had to stay up late sometimes. His antics reached even the janitor lady, who wasn't getting paid much to begin with, so even she quit her job. So the biggest problem was finding a replacement for her. For pennies, no one wanted to mop the floors all day and rub the door handles till they shine. The HR manager, Mrs. Bennett, tried every day to convince Nate to add at least a little to the salary of the janitor, saying that for that kind of pay, they would never find an employee. So every morning, during the staff meeting, all Nate did was complain how dirty and dusty it was in the whole office. Office was indeed getting pretty dirty by this time. It was during one of these morning meetings when Nate complained about every single thing that was going on in the office. Everybody was dumbfounded because this branch of the company was functioning perfectly fine. After going over the weekly reports, Nate turned his attention to the problem of the janitor position. "If you don't find a janitor soon, I'll have to include cleaning in your direct duties," he almost shouted to the HR manager. She was ready to run anywhere from this freak of a saver, but she knew that at her age, it was not so easy to find a job. Therefore, every time Nate brought this up, she just silently listened to his unreasonable approaches and demands, washing it all down later in her office with anti-anxiety pills. At the next such morning meeting, the manager once again expressed his dissatisfaction with Mrs. Bennett's work, saying that the janitor had still not been found. "Is it really that difficult to find a cleaner? I mean, we're so successful that anybody would be willing to work in a stable company," Nate said angrily, slowly approaching the window. At some point, he silently froze and just stayed there, staring out the window. His gaze seemed to focus on something in the distance. At the garbage cans, a very poorly dressed woman was neatly stacking cardboard boxes. Nate started smiling slyly. He turned to Mrs. Bennett and said, "So you're saying no one wants to join our company for that pay, huh? Watch and learn, rookies." He opened the window wide since it was pretty warm outside. "Hey, tramp, come in for a minute. I got an offer you might want to hear," Nate shouted. But the girl did not stop her work even for a second and just continued to fold the cardboards. The boss was surprised, but he was not going to back down. There was even some excitement in his eyes. "Hey, you need some cash? Get over here, tramp," he shouted again. But the girl kept working. That irritated the boss a little, and he turned to Mrs. Bennett to get him the security guard. When the security guard came running in the conference room, Nate told him, "Get that bum by the dump over here." "ASAP," he said to the guy in the uniform. A few minutes later, the girl entered the office. After a few failed attempts to speak with her, it became clear that she was completely deaf. She seemed to have a hearing aid, but apparently it wasn't working properly, or it was just a cheap one. The beggar looked about 30 years old. Surprisingly, up close, she was a very neat girl. Her hands were clean, as were clothes and hair. The absence of makeup made her face even younger and lighter. Her hair was neatly combed and collected in a bun. Her clothes looked poor, but clean. Although the size of her clothes didn't really fit her, at least it didn't smell. The boss, apparently remembering that the deaf people can read lips, began pronouncing each syllable slowly. "Do you understand what I am saying?" The girl nodded. "Do you want a job? You do not have to do much. You'll be just cleaning the office," finished the boss. The girl stood there silently for a couple of minutes, looking around. Then she nodded in agreement, which made Nate rise in victory. He was so proud of himself. He turned to Mrs. Bennet, who was quietly watching what was happening. "Can't find a cleaning lady? Perhaps you just forgot how to hire people? Well, here's a lesson for you. That worthless piece of crap was ready even for a smaller salary. By the way, before you announce it to her, think about cutting it down a little bit maybe." But when he saw Mrs. Bennet's look, he realized he was pushing it down too much, and even the homeless girl would run away for that kind of pay. So he dropped the idea. The deaf girl started working. Her name was Lauren, and she always came to the office on time. Sometimes even long before the start of the working day. She diligently washed, cleaned, and wiped everything that she came across. In just a week, the office was unrecognizable. But that did not improve the team's attitude towards the deaf colleague, who was often the target of cruel and teasing jokes. The colleagues would make fun of her behind her back and laugh so hard, knowing that she couldn't hear them. The girl's hearing aid was of low quality and old, yet she could still hear some of the nasty things people told about her and her work. Despite the constant harassment, she had been through a lot in life and was able to maintain her composure. She always looked forward to leaving work and returning to her peaceful home on the outskirts of the town where she lived in an old and abandoned shack. Lauren was not alone in her small home. She had taken in several stray pets, including 3 kittens, a cat, 2 dogs, and a parrot with a broken paw. These animals were her constant companions, and she was willing to endure the teasing and ridicule at work in order to provide for them. Her pets were her source of comfort and love, and their presence helped her to cope with the daily abuse at work. At night, while she may have only bread and water for herself, she would always make sure to have something delicious for her furry friends, as their loving glances were enough to make up for a hard day's work. Mrs. Bennet was extremely pleased with the cleaning lady, whose work kept the office spotless, despite the fact that her colleagues continued to mock her behind her back. And the manager, Nate, he still remained unimpressed with her work. He couldn't quite put his finger on what he wanted from her. But over time, the girl's silent demeanor and intelligent eyes began to earn her the respect of her colleagues. Even those who had previously made fun of Lauren began to realize that her past was not as simple as they thought. Despite being a beggar, she was well-spoken and literate. Her speech was brief but insightful. Her colleagues were often taken aback by her clever and thought-provoking remarks, giving the impression that she had a deep understanding of many things, but just chose not to reveal it. It became clear to them that her current situation was not a reflection of her intelligence or abilities. The office atmosphere had become tense and stressful, with Nate the boss displaying aggressive behavior every morning during the meetings. He seemed to blame others for the company's poor performance, which had begun to decline dramatically. As a result of this decline, the boss, who had become increasingly bitter, began to let go of employees on a regular basis, often firing multiple people at once. This only added to the negative atmosphere and uncertainty among the remaining employees. Rumors were circulating among the co-workers that Nate the boss would soon be the only one left in the office. The company's owner and CEO, Nolan, had begun visiting more frequently, likely due to the branch's sudden decline in profits. However, Nate would use this as an opportunity to intimidate and pressure the employees to create a positive image for Nolan during his visits. Despite Nate's efforts, Nolan, who had built the company from the ground up, was not going to let it fail and would take action to turn things around. After several visits to what was once one of his successful branches, Nolan noticed that while the office appeared to be functioning well on the surface, there was a sense of unease among the employees. After another visit, Nolan announced that the company was undergoing a thorough cleaning process and that all employees, including the manager, would be given a paid day off. Anyone who refused would still be paid. While everyone was away, Nolan had installed hidden cameras throughout the office, which were connected to his personal computer. He wanted to uncover the truth about what was really happening in the office and take action to salvage the business he had built through hard work. Nolan dedicated himself to monitoring the office every day, from the time it opened until it closed. He meticulously gathered information and evidence to understand the reasons behind the branch's decline. One day during a meeting, Nolan was presented with a well-crafted business development plan that caught him off guard. He quickly read through the material and looked up at Nate in surprise. "What is this?" Nolan asked Nate, holding up the business plan. "Who prepared it?" Nate realized that Nolan was intrigued by the material and modestly lowered his gaze, replying, "I worked very hard on it, sir. I didn't sleep for several nights. I really hope you like it." The first thing that struck Nolan as odd was the neat feminine handwriting. He had read multiple reports written by Nick, so he was familiar with his scrawled handwriting. His further investigation gave him more clues that Nate's mind was as convoluted and erratic as his handwriting. Nolan viewed the recorded videos and was shocked to discover that the cleaning lady had spent a significant amount of time working on the papers late into the night. She was completely focused and engrossed in her work, not even keeping track of the time. She was also able to create graphs and diagrams so easily as if she had been doing it for years. Nolan was upset that he overlooked so many things at his branch. The next morning, Nate was summoned to Nolan's office. He came rushing in, but as soon as he saw the expression on Nolan's face, he suddenly stopped. He stood there looking down on the ground as Nolan scolded him. Everyone in the office was too afraid to speak or move, fearing the boss's wrath. "Do you realize that your deceit and deception nearly destroyed the branch?" Nolan started furiously. "I am just astounded at the number of high-class employees I've lost due to your arrogant behavior. You fired all of the best workers that I've been working hard to handpick for so long." "Nolan, let me explain." "I don't need your explanation. I was like, okay, I guess Nate's probably testing some kind of technique, but when you attempted to take credit for someone else's work, that was the last straw." Nolan calmed down, sighed, and said, "You have 10 minutes to get your stuff and leave." The once confident manager suddenly appeared defeated and lost color in his face as he made his way towards the exit. At that moment, he heard Nolan ask the secretary to bring in the cleaning lady, a young woman named Lauren, who was deaf. As soon as Lauren silently entered the office, Nolan gestured for her to sit down. "Please, take a seat. I want to know more about you. Obviously, you're intelligent and have not been disadvantaged all your life." Nolan began the conversation. The girl, a bit confused, confirmed that this was the case. As she started speaking, Nolan realized that despite her deafness, she was not dim-witted. She looked out the window as she spoke softly and began to share her story. Lauren grew up in a very poor family, but from a young age, she had a love for learning new things. Despite the difficult circumstances of her household, where her parents would drink heavily and engage in drunken fights at night, she worked hard on her studies. From the third grade until she graduated, she would seek refuge in an abandoned house near her apartment and would study there on the days her parents were drinking. In the morning, she would slip back home quietly to grab her clothes in the backpack while her family was still asleep and would rush to school. Despite the challenging circumstances, Lauren managed to excel in her studies and had no difficulties getting accepted into a business school. She was a smart and determined student who was well liked by all her teachers. She had a natural ability to understand concepts so quickly and was always willing to assist her classmates. It came as no surprise to anyone that Lauren graduated with the highest GPA. Business administration was her favorite subject and her lifelong aspiration. It was there where she first met her first love, Connor, who was a year older. As soon as they saw each other in the university's hallway, they knew they had fallen in love. However, Connor's wealthy family disapproved of their relationship, particularly the idea of their son marrying a smart but financially challenged woman. Despite this, their love was so strong that Connor proposed to Lauren, expressing that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. Lauren and her fiancé, Connor, went to visit her friends outside the city one day. They were in high spirits, especially since they were due to get married in a week. They were getting close to their friend's country house, where everyone was already waiting for them, when a dense fog descended suddenly. Everything around them was white and hazy. They didn't even realize when the headlights of an oncoming car shone right into their windshield. A terrible screech of brakes, a crash. When Lauren regained consciousness, she was already in an ambulance. The first thing Lauren asked about was her fiancé's well-being. She fainted upon learning that he had passed away. When she woke up in the hospital room, Lauren immediately realized that something had changed in her life. From that moment on, she became deaf. The doctors were unable to explain the sudden loss of hearing and attributed it to stress. Despite her hearing loss and difficult mental state, she pleaded with the doctors to allow her to attend her lover's funeral, but she was denied even the chance to visit his grave. Connor's parents blamed her for the accident and claimed that if it weren't for her and her broke friends, he wouldn't have gone to the country house. In the end, almost launching at her with her fists, Connor's mother literally hissed, "Bitch, I will make your life miserable. You can only get a job as a janitor at best. You will cry regretting that you ruined my son." The only thing that the poor girl regretted at that moment was that she didn't die instead of Connor. After all, no one needed her anyway. Her mom changed roommates like gloves and soon managed to burn down their house when she was having drinking sprees with another one of them. Her life was full of no's. No job, no home, no love, and now no hearing. It was impossible to get a job. No one was interested in a deaf, fragile beggar. In the beginning, she taught herself how to read lips. After some time, she managed to earn a bit of extra money by cleaning at the local market. She spent that money on a cheap hearing aid. It didn't restore her hearing completely, but it allowed her to hear some words. From then on, she started to just wander around. She found a small shed where she could take shelter. Despite her difficult circumstances, she never complained about her life because she had already seen so much unfairness. She was content with her beloved pets, who were her closest companions. The only problem was that when the weather turned cold, her pets would freeze since the room in the abandoned house was not heated. Even at that moment, she was worried about her pets' well-being. Nolan sat there, quietly listening to her sad story. At the end of the story, he remembered the tragic accident involving Connor. He knew his rich parents and was saddened by what happened. That same day, he offered Lauren, a highly qualified business graduate, to become the new executive director of the branch. And when she agreed, He was very satisfied with the decision. The branch improved rapidly. Nolan visited the branch frequently. Sometimes he was even seen picking up Lauren from work. At some point, everyone knew they were dating, and eventually, the news of their marriage became known to everyone. Nolan made her a perfect gift. One day, he dropped by the branch after lunch. He knocked on Laura's office, and when he entered, he saw that she was all consumed as usual. "Honey, take a break, will ya? I got you something." In his hands was a certificate making her the owner of an animal shelter where all her pets were residing. As she settled into her new home with her husband, she would not have the time to take care of them in the foreseeable future. On top of everything, she was excitedly preparing for the arrival of a baby boy. When Nolan heard the news, he was overjoyed. There's one more miracle that happened in Lauren's life that even doctors couldn't explain. Her hearing suddenly returned as if it was never gone, making her fully functional. The large and spacious house of the businessman was now filled with the warmth and comfort of a home. What are your thoughts on the story and characters? How would you handle things differently? Share your thoughts, as they may be helpful for those experiencing difficult times. If you enjoyed the story, please consider liking and subscribing for more content. Click the notification bell button. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.
12-year-old Sophia came home from school earlier than expected because her drawing class was canceled. Pushing open the door, she immediately noticed the raised voices of her father, Kevin, and his girlfriend, Jessica, coming from the living room. "Kevin, please reconsider. Sending her to a boarding school isn't a solution. She's just a child. Yes, she can be difficult at times, but remember, she's only 12, and she's still grieving her mother," Jessica pleaded. Kevin's voice, heavy with weariness and sorrow, replied, "Jessica, we've done everything we can, right? Yet nothing seems to work with her. Maybe a year at boarding school might help her learn discipline and respect, which we can't seem to instill in her." Hearing this, Sophia felt a sudden wave of dizziness, a sensation she'd been experiencing often. Still, she remained hidden, wanting to hear more. "How can you even think of such a thing, Kevin? She's your daughter," Jessica exclaimed with increasing frustration. The conversation revealed that Jessica and Kevin were debating whether to send Sophia to a boarding school. Kevin believed that it might help Sophia learn better behavior and respect. Ever since Jessica had become a part of their lives, Sophia had been resistant, even resentful, not wanting anything to do with her. It had been over 5 years since the sad departure of Kevin's wife, Ellie. Sophia was still struggling to come to terms with her mother's absence and the presence of Jessica in their lives. Rewinding to 10 years ago, Kevin's life was quite different. He was hustling, working at a friend's restaurant, waiting tables during the day, and attending evening classes. His father had always taught him to strive for 2 things in life: building a successful business and nurturing a loving family. Kevin was a determined man, always pushing forward to achieve his dreams. One day at the gym, while he was adjusting the weights on his machine, he noticed Ellie looking confused with a leg press. Seizing the chance to help, he walked over, flashing a warm smile. "Need some assistance with that?" he offered. Caught off guard but appreciative, Ellie responded, "Yes, thank you. I'm not familiar with this one." Graciously, Kevin guided her through the setup and proper usage. From that simple interaction, they struck up a conversation that flowed naturally. Ellie, a kind-hearted woman with strong values, had been in a relationship with Sean, but things didn't last, and after daughter Sophia was born, Sean left. Ellie found herself solely responsible for their young daughter. Being an attractive person, Ellie was used to getting attention, but whenever she mentioned her past marriage and her daughter, many men would lose interest. Kevin, however, was different. "The fact that you have a daughter doesn't change how I feel about you," he told Ellie when she shared her story. Deep inside, Kevin felt it was a significant detail, but he chose not to voice that concern in front of Ellie. Kevin took his time pondering the implications. Having never been in a serious relationship before, this was new territory for him. His mother had always taught him to emphasize and to see things from others' perspectives, so he reflected on Ellie's situation. If he were raising a child alone, how would he want someone to view him? He chose understanding and compassion. Kevin appreciated Ellie's honesty about her past. It showed him that she valued transparency, which only deepened his admiration for her. Their initial encounters at the gym transformed into delightful coffee dates. The more they spent time together, the more they found shared interests, like their mutual love for outdoor adventures and an undeniable appreciation for Italian food. What puzzled Kevin, though, was Ellie's silence about her daughter Sophia. Despite being a mother, Ellie never mentioned Sophia during their dates. She didn't reschedule or prioritize her daughter over their time together. Having grown up in a large family, Kevin was familiar with the demands of raising kids. Gathering his courage one day, he asked Ellie why Sophia never came up in their conversations. "Because you never asked?" she answered simply, catching Kevin by surprise, his face turning a shade of pink. Noticing his discomfort, Ellie smiled warmly, adding, "It's okay, Kevin. I sensed your hesitation a while back. Understand this, I'm not only searching for a potential husband. If you just want to enjoy our time together without involving Sophia, that's fine. We can keep things uncomplicated." Kevin was taken aback by her candidness, not having anticipated such an open response. Feeling reassured, he surprised her by asking to meet Sophia on their upcoming date. Fast forward the months, and the trio, Kevin, Ellie, and little Sophia, were inseparable. Their weekends were filled with sunlit picnics, visits to art galleries, and even some playful dance lessons. Kevin and Ellie quickly realized that their connection was deepening into something more significant than just friendship. The more time they spent together, the clearer it became that they shared a special bond. One evening, as they dined at their go-to Italian restaurant, Kevin took a deep breath and ventured, "Do you ever think about us as, well, more than just friends?" Ellie, her eyes shining with mischief, answered, "Every day since we first met." While Kevin's parents were understanding of his choices, believing he was mature enough to make his own decisions, not everyone shared their confidence. Some friends and family members expressed their doubts about his relationship with Ellie. Uncle Dave and Aunt Jasmine were particularly vocal. Both had previously been in relationships with partners who had children and had faced challenges. Aunt Jasmine warned Kevin, "Be cautious. Children who aren't biologically yours can sometimes hold that against you. What will you do if she grows up and throws that in your face?" Uncle Dave was even more direct. He cornered Kevin one day and said, "Think twice before you dive deep into this, Kevin. Being with a woman who has a child can complicate things. When issues arise, disciplining the child isn't always straightforward. You're committing not just to Ellie, but also to her daughter. Do you truly understand what that entails?" Kevin was taken aback by the intensity of their feelings, but he knew he had to trust his judgment and feelings for Ellie and Sophia. Despite the doubters and naysayers, the trio shared a harmonious life for the next year. Kevin's affection for young Sophia grew daily, and she quickly found a special place in his heart. Tired of the constant negative comments from others, Kevin made the bold decision to move his little family to a different town for a fresh start. A year later, he and Ellie exchanged vows, with the adorable 3-year-old Sophia proudly taking on the role of ring bearer. Kevin had always envisioned that he'd find his one true love, someone he'd spend his entire life with, and on his wedding day, he was confident that he had found her in Ellie. Yet life had its own twists and turns in store for them. The years following their wedding were prosperous for the family. Ellie was a pillar of support for Kevin, always there to uplift him during his business endeavors. After facing a few setbacks, Kevin eventually established a small construction firm that, to his delight, rapidly expanded. The couple had initially decided to keep the truth about Sophia's biological father a secret until she was old enough to understand. This was their agreement for the time being. Over the next 5 years, their lives were filled with joy and success. Kevin's business flourished, becoming a renowned name in the industry. With their lives on a steady course, Kevin and Ellie began contemplating expanding their family. One evening, after they'd settled down from a warm family dinner, Ellie looked at Kevin with awareness in her eyes. "Kevin," she began, hesitating for a moment, I've been feeling so drained recently. It's not just everyday fatigue. It's something more. Kevin, noticing the worry in her voice, gently took her hand. What do you mean? Is everything okay? Ellie had been deeply involved in Kevin's business lately, preparing to take the reins of the marketing department. I thought it was just the stress of work, but it's different. I've been waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, burning up with fever. And now, even a simple cold seems to linger and knock me down. This isn't like me. Concerned, Kevin urged her to see a doctor. Let's not take any chances. Let's see someone about this. At the hospital, the initial tests were inconclusive. Doctors ran a gamut of examinations, but couldn't immediately pinpoint the issue. The waiting was agonizing. It felt like an eternity before they had an answer. Finally, a somber-faced doctor approached them. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. He began choosing his words carefully. Ellie, you have been diagnosed with lymphoblastic leukemia. Both Ellie and Kevin were stunned into silence, trying to process the weight of what they just heard. Kevin squeezed Ellie's hand tightly, searching for words of comfort. We'll face this together, every step of the way. You are not alone. The diagnosis felt like a heavy weight on Kevin's shoulders. After numerous consultations and examinations, the doctors concluded that chemotherapy was the only viable option to treat Ellie's condition. The treatment sapped Ellie's strength, leaving her frail. For the subsequent 2 years, Kevin found himself juggling between the responsibilities of his business and supporting Ellie at home. Recognizing the toll the treatment took on her, Ellie made the heart-wrenching decision to step back from work and focus on spending quality time with Sophia. One evening, as Ellie was tucking Sophia into bed, the young girl, sensing the change in her mother's energy, asked, Mommy, why are you home all the time now? Why aren't you going to work with Daddy? Ellie, taking a moment to gather her thoughts, replied gently, Sweetie, Mommy isn't feeling too well lately, so I'm taking a break from work to spend more time with you. Sophia's innocent eyes widened. You're not feeling good? Like when I had the flu? Ellie nodded, giving her daughter a soft smile. Yes, something like that. But don't worry, darling. Daddy and I are doing everything we can to make me feel better. As days turned into weeks, Kevin's optimism waned. Ellie's once vibrant demeanor had faded. She became gaunt and her energy levels plummeted. Most days, she remained confined to her bed, with the strength of her voice diminishing. On a rare day when she felt slightly better, Ellie beckoned Kevin to sit beside her. With considerable effort and in a feeble voice, she said, Kevin, if something happens to me, promise me you'll look after Sophia. She'll need a caring mother's touch. The sheer weight of her words and the reality of their situation hit Kevin hard. He had been trying to stay strong, holding back his emotions for so long, but hearing Ellie's plea broke him. Tears welled up in his eyes, streaming down his face as he whispered back, I promise, Ellie. I promise. After Ellie's passing, Sophia seemed to accept the loss with a surprising level of calmness. Perhaps the preceding months, seeing her mother weakened and bedridden, had prepared her in some way. Ellie had gently explained to Sophia in the past, telling her that sometimes God calls good people to be with him, and that one day she might be one of those people. However, Sophia's initial composed demeanor was short-lived. 3 days after Ellie's departure, the dam of emotions burst. Sophia, who had held herself together, was suddenly overwhelmed with the reality of her mother's absence. She cried uncontrollably, the weight of her loss fully sinking in. The house that Kevin and Sophia shared was filled with memories of Ellie, from her clothes hanging in the wardrobe to her favorite books on the shelf and the pictures of her radiant smile that adorned the walls. In the weeks that followed her passing, Kevin was consumed by grief. However, he understood the importance of moving forward, especially for Sophia's sake. He found solace in his work, and as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the pain started to fade. Children, with their resilient nature, tend to adapt quickly. A year later, it seemed as if Sophia had bounced back, living her life as if the tragedy had never occurred. But Kevin knew that the memories of her mother were safely tucked away in her heart. Kevin's business flourished, and as it grew, so did Sophia. With the expansion of his business, Kevin began collaborating with more partners and companies. During a work meeting, he was introduced to Jessica, a sharp and captivating manager representing one of their partner companies. Their professional discussions soon ventured into personal chats. Before long, they were seeing each other outside of work. Feeling the growing bond between them, Kevin felt it was essential for Jessica to know about his past. He opened up about being a widower and having a 12-year-old daughter. Her response, "It doesn't really change anything for me," was strikingly reminiscent of Kevin's words when he first met Ellie. This coincidence, paired with his mother's advice about empathy, brought a chuckle to Kevin's lips. After dating Jessica for over 6 months, she posed a question he hadn't anticipated. "So, when do I get to meet Sophia?" Kevin was taken aback. He hadn't considered how Sophia would feel about him dating again. Sophia's reaction to the news was far from positive. She felt a profound sense of betrayal, not just towards Kevin, but also towards the memory of her mother. To Sophia, it felt like Kevin was trying to replace Ellie, and she wasn't ready to accept that. Kevin found himself in a challenging situation, one he hadn't anticipated. In hindsight, he wished he had eased Sophia into the idea more gradually, maybe setting up a casual meeting with Jessica or mentioning her initially as just a friend. However, what's done was done, and now he faced the repercussions. Neither Kevin nor Jessica had realized the delicate intricacies of introducing a new figure into Sophia's life after Ellie. After days of receiving a cold reception from Sophia, she reluctantly agreed to meet Jessica. As the moment approached, Sophia's emotions bubbled up. Her eyes glistened with tears, and a lump formed in her throat. "Do I have to call her mom now?" Sophia uttered, her voice quivering with emotion. Kevin, sensing his daughter's turmoil, replied gently, "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." He brushed her hair softly and continued, "I just hope you give her a chance, Soph. You've always been wise beyond your years, right?" Overwhelmed, Sophia couldn't contain her tears any longer and dashed into her room. A few days passed, and the day of the introduction came. Jessica, with her short brunette hair, walked into the living room. "Sophia," Kevin began, "this is Jessica, the person I told you about." With a sincere smile, Jessica extended her hand, saying, "Hi, Sophia. Kevin's told me so much about you. You can just call me Jessica." Sophia's response was curt. "I need to finish my homework," she said, evading Jessica's friendly gesture. As she made her way to her room, she overheard Jessica's empathetic comment to Kevin. "It's okay. It's new for all of us. We all need time." Jessica's tone remained steady, even in the face of Sophia's chilly reception. That night, Kevin entered Sophia's room, his expression serious. "Sophia, acting this way isn't helping anyone. Jessica genuinely wants to get to know you. She even offered to help with your homework." "I don't need her help," Sophia mumbled, looking away. The next morning, as she finished her breakfast, Sophia stood up, intending to leave without clearing her plate. "Aren't you forgetting something?" Kevin asked, nodding towards the unwashed dishes. "We have a new lady in the house. Let her take care of it," Sophia said cheekily, not meeting Jessica's eyes. "No worries, Kevin. I've got it," Jessica replied, gracefully sidestepping the tension. Kevin hoped for Jessica to become a more permanent presence in their home, but Jessica hesitated, feeling it might complicate things further for Sophia. Months later, though, Sophia seemed more open to the idea, suggesting that Kevin could invite Jessica over. One crisp autumn weekend, Jessica tentatively knocked on Sophia's door. "Sophia," she began, "your dad and I thought it'd be nice to walk in the park. The fall colors are just beautiful. Would you want to come with us?" Sophia was curt in her response. "Just go without me. I don't want to go. Please, leave," she added, turning her back to Jessica. "All right, maybe some other time," Jessica replied gently, leaving the room. Moments later, Sophia could hear her father's raised voice. "Enough is enough. She has to come with us. I'm tired of her acting out." Jessica, however, intervened, her tone calm, yet firm. "Kevin, forcing her isn't the answer. We need to be patient. Pushing too hard now might create even more distance between you two. Let's give her time." Sophia's routine had become clear. A swift exit to her room after meals, minimal conversation, and a palpable air of resentment, especially towards Jessica. It was a month into this silent rebellion when Jessica mentioned their upcoming Friday plans. "Sophia, Kevin, and I will be out on Friday evening for a friend's birthday," she said, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Sophia's next question took Jessica by surprise. What will you be wearing? Pleased that Sophia was showing interest, Jessica enthusiastically opened her closet to display the elegant evening dress she had picked out. Do you like it? She asked with a hopeful glint in her eye. Sophia shrugged. It's okay. The following day, a shock awaited Jessica. Her beautiful dress lay shredded on her bed, rendering it completely unwearable. Kevin's face reddened with anger when he saw the ruined fabric. What on earth does she think she's doing? He exclaimed, his voice raising with every word. Before he could continue his tirade, Jessica, ever the voice of reason, interrupted. Kevin, let's talk to Sophia first. Understand her reasons before we jump to conclusions. She's just trying to ruin our evening, Jess. It's evident she can't stand you being around. Kevin's frustration was evident. Jessica took a deep breath. She is still grappling with the loss of her mother, and seeing her dad with someone else is hard. We can't forget that she's just a kid. I'll wear something else to the party. Although, she added with a slight sigh, I did love that dress. Jessica's unexpected defense stunned Sophia. She had hoped Jessica would retaliate, maybe even leave for good. Seeing them share happy moments was a constant reminder of her mother's absence. So every time laughter or the sounds of their shared conversations reached her ears, she would retreat to her sanctuary and cocoon herself in silence. Whenever Kevin found himself alone with his thoughts, doubt and frustration began to cloud his judgment. He felt cornered by Sophia's behavior, believing she was deliberately trying to manipulate him and stop him from moving on with his life. One particularly difficult day, in a moment of exasperation, he threatened to send her to a boarding school if her behavior didn't change. Jessica was stunned when she heard about Kevin's ultimatum. I get that she isn't your biological daughter, she began cautiously, but you've been her father figure ever since she was tiny. How can you even think of pushing her away? She might not have warmed up to me, but you're the only father she's ever known. That very day, Sophia decided to skip school. Retreating to her room, she was consumed by thoughts of the happy times she had shared with her father. They had been close, with Kevin teaching her to swim, introducing her to the game of chess, and sharing countless other precious moments. Now, it felt like he was ready to cast her aside. She blamed Jessica for this growing rift between them. Locked in her room without food or company, Sophia's health began to wane. By evening, as she tried to leave her room, her vision started to blur. Moments later, she found herself collapsing, and darkness took over. When she woke up, she was in her bed, with Jessica's concerned face hovering over her. Sophia, you gave us quite the scare, Jessica whispered, her voice trembling with concern. You just collapsed in the hallway. We had to call for medical help. The doctor said it might have been because of excessive stress. Sophia, still feeling weak and disoriented, simply turned her head away, wanting to avoid any conversation. Jessica gently rearranged the cool cloth on Sophia's forehead. Try to rest, she whispered, leaving the room. We can talk when you're up for it. The morning sun was still in its infancy, casting a pale light into Sophia's room. She was still weak and was advised to take the day off from school. Jessica, ever concerned, decided it was best for Sophia to see a doctor. The young girl heard Jessica on the phone, making an appointment for her. Do I really need to see a doctor? Sophia asked, her voice wavering with a hint of nervousness. Look, Sophia, Jessica said gently, I've noticed you've been looking a bit pale lately, and you tire easily. Plus, after what happened yesterday, it's best to make sure everything is okay. Sophia, not really knowing how to respond, just looked away, her thoughts miles away from the room. The doctor's office was filled with a strange silence after the initial consultation. We'll need to run some tests before drawing any conclusions, the doctor advised. Please get these done as soon as possible. Once the results were in, they found themselves back in the cold, sterile environment of the clinic. The atmosphere was tense. The doctor, with a heavy sigh, asked Jessica and Sophia to leave the room, indicating that he wanted to talk to Kevin alone. Once they were alone, the doctor delivered the devastating news. I'm afraid Sophia has been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the same type her mother had. Kevin felt a rush of emotions. Shock, despair, and guilt engulfed him. All he could think of was Sophia and how he was about to lose another loved one. He clenched his fists, trying to stay composed. What do we do now? He managed to ask. The doctor explained the severity of the situation. Sophia is at a stage where the disease can progress rapidly. A bone marrow transplant is critical, and the sooner we find a donor, the better. Kevin's mind raced as he processed the dire situation. Sophia's rare blood type, AB negative, made finding a donor even more daunting. Time was not on their side. Your best chance is to test if either of you is a match, the doctor suggested. Kevin nodded, a fierce determination growing within him. He would do whatever it took to save his daughter. Kevin's heart pounded heavily as he clutched the doctor's table, trying to absorb the grim news. Memories of his wife Ellie flooded back. Sophia's mother died of the same disease, he muttered, pain evident in his voice. Did Sophia inherit this from her? The doctor, showing a mix of sympathy and urgency, asked, Kevin, what's your blood type? Every moment counts now. I am O positive, Kevin replied with a heavy sigh. The doctor's next words further intensified Kevin's fears. Finding a matching blood type is just a beginning. Convincing someone to become a bone marrow donor isn't easy. Many are reluctant due to the perceived risks. Amidst the whirlwind of conversations, Sophia, even though young, could sense the gravity of the situation. She mistakenly correlated her ailment to Jessica's arrival in their lives. That evening, overwhelmed with emotion, Sophia confronted Kevin. If Jessica never came into our lives, I wouldn't be sick, she cried bitterly. Devastated, Kevin felt lost. His world seemed to crumble once more. As he stepped into the hallway, he saw Jessica. Their eyes met, and her face reflected the pain she felt, having overheard Sophia's words. I'm so sorry, Jess, Kevin murmured, regret evident in his eyes. I think it's best if we take a step back for now. Jessica nodded, pain evident in her eyes. I understand, Kevin. You need to do what's best for Sophia right now. She quietly began packing her bags, leaving a heartbroken Kevin behind. The following day was a blur for Kevin, as his hours were consumed with anxious phone calls and discussions in his desperate quest for a donor. During his mid-afternoon break, Dr. Deans was chatting with his colleagues when Jessica stormed into his office. Doctor, I have AB negative blood. I want to be a donor for Sophia. Taken aback, Dr. Deans responded, But you aren't related by blood, right? No, I'm not, Jessica replied urgently. But if there is a chance I can help Sophia, what does that matter? Pondering for a moment, Dr. Deans nodded. You're right, every moment counts. But where are Kevin and Sophia? They should be here. Jessica quickly filled the doctor in on the recent events and their strained relationship. She pleaded with him to keep her identity as the potential donor a secret, suggesting he tell Kevin they found a donor just in time. All right, Dr. Deans agreed. First things first though, you need to gather your essentials and I'll kickstart the hospital admission process. We'll have to do a thorough check to ensure you're a fit donor. Later, when Kevin received the news of a found donor from Dr. Deans, relief washed over him. He turned to Sophia, squeezing her hand gently. Everything's gonna be alright, Sophia. I'll be with you every step of the way. Don't be afraid. As the medical tests confirmed Jessica's compatibility, Dr. Deans shared the news with her, admiration clear in his eyes. Jessica, your selflessness is remarkable. Despite the risks, you're stepping up for Sophia, as if she were your own. I've been in this profession for 2 decades, and your act stands out. Jessica simply nodded, emotion welling up in her eyes. All that matters is that Sophia gets a chance at life, she murmured. On the drive to the hospital, Kevin's mind swirled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. He sent up silent prayers, fervently hoping that everything would go smoothly for Sophia. Sophia's procedure was a success. For Jessica, the process was more intensive. Doctors harvested bone marrow from her under anesthesia. When Jessica awoke, her vision was hazy. The bright, sterile environment of the hospital room momentarily confused her. As the fog of anesthesia lifted, memories of her selfless act surfaced. A kindly nurse, seeing her stir, approached her bed. How do you feel? The nurse inquired, her tone soothing. Jessica's mouth felt dry, and words seemed to evade her for a moment. A bit dazed, I guess? She finally managed, her voice faint. You're in the ICU for now, just so the doctors can monitor your recovery, the nurse said, offering a comforting smile. But the good news is, the procedure went off without a hitch. We don't anticipate any complications. Kevin's heart was lighter knowing the transplant had gone well. While the road ahead was long, with Sophia requiring close medical supervision, there was a renewed hope in his heart. The next day, as morning sunlight streamed into the hospital corridors, Jessica was transferred from the ICU to a regular room where she would recover for the next week. Kevin spent the morning at Sophia's side, chatting, consoling, and ensuring she had everything she needed. As he stepped into the hallway for a moment of respite, he took a deep, steadying breath and decided to update Jessica on the recent developments. Unaware that she was the donor, he believed she would be thrilled to hear that they had found a donor and successfully completed the transplant. Kevin paused, taking a moment to gather himself as he slowly wandered down the hospital hallway, still trying to process what had just happened. He was on his way to update Jessica about Sophia when a nurse briskly walked by, clutching a set of clothes and a ringing cell phone. Kevin's eyes darted to the phone case. It was unmistakably Jessica's. He watched the nurse intently as she made her way to a room further down. As the realization washed over him, Kevin's steps quickened. Before he could enter the room, however, he was intercepted by a doctor. "Sir, you can't go in there," the doctor stated firmly. "That phone, it's Jessica's. What happened to her?" Kevin's voice was filled with panic. The doctor tried to calm him down. "She's okay. She was here as a bone marrow donor." A weight seemed to lift off Kevin's chest, replaced by astonishment. Jessica had been their saving grace and chose to keep it a secret. 2 weeks later, Sophia was back home, surrounded by the love and care of her father. The house echoed with her laughter once again. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Kevin wrapped her in a warm embrace, assuring her that the worst was over. Sophia looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry for the hurtful things I said. You've been amazing throughout all of this." Kevin gently held her face and said, "It's okay, sweetheart, but there's something you need to know." Seeing the solemnity in his eyes, Sophia braced herself. "Do you remember when we got the news about the donor?" Kevin began. Sophia nodded slowly. "That donor didn't just come out of the blue. It was Jessica. She came forward to save you." Kevin's voice quivered with emotion. Sophia's eyes widened in shock, her previous feelings of animosity replaced by deep gratitude. "She did that for me?" Kevin nodded, wiping away his tears. "She wanted it to remain a secret, but she needed to know. Jessica cares about us, especially you." In that moment, Sophia's heart overflowed with newfound appreciation for Jessica's selfless act. The realization forever changed the dynamics of their relationship. Sophia blinked back the tears, her emotions swirling. She remembered Jessica's infectious laughter, her bright hazel eyes that always held warmth. She had often found herself irritated by Jessica's unwavering kindness, mistaking it for insincerity. Yet now, realizing the depth of Jessica's genuine care, Sophia felt a pang of guilt and gratitude. "Dad," she whispered, looking up at Kevin, "can we go see her? I need to apologize." Kevin nodded, understanding the importance of this moment. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's go." They made their way to the hospital the next day, armed with a beautiful bouquet of daisies, Sophia's idea to symbolize new beginnings. Entering Jessica's room, they found her reclined on the bed, reading a magazine. She looked up and smiled, but the surprise was evident in her eyes. Sophia approached slowly, clutching the bouquet tightly. "Mama Jessica?" she began hesitantly, her voice wavering. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong about you. I promised to be better." Jessica gently touched Sophia's cheek, wiping away a tear. "It's okay, sweetheart. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them." Sophia took a deep breath, her voice firmer now. "I have another wish. I hope you and Dad can have another baby. I'd love to have a little sibling to care for." Jessica's laughter filled the room, lightening the mood. "Let's focus on getting you better first," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Then we'll see about making your wish come true." Sophia's transition to homeschooling had its challenges, but with Jessica's unwavering support and patience, they developed a comfortable rhythm. The virtual lessons were convenient and flexible, but Sophia yearned for the lively chatter and the camaraderie of her classmates. Still, she knew that her health came first, and she made the best of the situation. Over time, her resilience and adaptability paid off. When the day came for her to return to traditional school, she was both excited and a little nervous. Throughout Sophia's recovery journey, Jessica remained her pillar of strength, attending to her needs and ensuring she received the best medical care. Every doctor's visit brought them more hope and confidence as Sophia continued to show signs of robust health. The joy of welcoming baby Sonia was immense. Her tiny cries, infectious giggles, and heartwarming coos added a new layer of happiness to their lives. Sophia, ever the caring sister, often took the lead, assisting Jessica with feeding and bathing routines. Their shared moments, from reading bedtime stories to singing lullabies, only strengthened the bond between them. One day, while Jessica was busy with Sonia, she couldn't help but eavesdrop on Sophia's animated phone conversation. When she recognized the topic of discussion and heard Sophia's heartfelt defense, emotions welled up inside her. The realization that Sophia considered her not just a mother figure, but her real mother, was overwhelmingly touching. Wiping away a tear, Jessica felt a warmth envelop her. Holding Sonia close, she whispered, "We are a family, complete and unbreakable." The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting a golden glow on everything it touched. Jessica drove to the cemetery with a bouquet of fresh wildflowers, Ellie's favorite. Walking slowly, she approached Ellie's resting place. The headstone was simple, engraved with her name and the words, "Loving wife and mother, forever in our hearts." Gently placing the flowers on the grave, Jessica sat down on the soft grass. Taking a deep breath, she said, "You left behind a beautiful family, and I want you to know that they are safe, loved, and happy. Sophia is turning into such a wonderful, strong young woman, and she has your spirit. She has your resilience and grace. We welcomed little Sonia into our family. She's brought so much joy to all of us." A gentle breeze blew, rustling the leaves and making the flowers sway, as if the world around Jessica was responding to her heartfelt words. Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of sadness, gratitude, and resolve. "Thank you, Ellie," Jessica whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "for bringing us all together. I promise to honor your memory every day by taking care of the family you so dearly loved." As Jessica stood up, she felt the warmth enveloping her, as if she wasn't alone, as if Ellie was right there with her, silently acknowledging and comforting her. With one last glance at the grave, Jessica walked away, her heart filled with a sense of peace and determination. Gary was in a rush to get home. He was supposed to come back from his work trip at the start of January, but he finished work early so he could come back sooner. He was very pleased with the way things turned out because he could now celebrate the new year with his wife in their cozy house in the suburbs. He had purchased the house before marrying his wife Cynthia so that it would be ready for her when she moved in. He had spent countless hours researching and inspecting properties, finally settling on this one because of its charming architecture, warm ambience, and close proximity to all the amenities they needed. Gary had a feeling that his wife Cynthia might not have made any preparations for their New Year celebration. His suspicion was confirmed when she told him over the phone the night before that she didn't find anything fun without him. She had said that she would celebrate the occasion with him in her dreams instead. Gary couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt at Cynthia's words. He had been away on a business trip, leaving her to spend the holiday season alone. Although he had tried his best to keep in touch with her over the phone, he knew that it wasn't the same as being there with her in person. He wanted to make it up to her by creating a special celebration for the two of them. With this in mind, Gary made a stop at the store to pick up some essentials for their New Year celebration. As he walked through the aisles, he carefully selected sausages, salads, and champagne to create a festive atmosphere. He even added a bouquet of Cynthia's favorite flowers to brighten up the table and show her how much he cared. Filled with love and anticipation, Gary hopped into a taxi and hurried home, eager to surprise her. When he arrived, he was so excited that he didn't even bother to ring the doorbell. Instead, he used his key and quietly entered the house. As he made his way to the kitchen, he carefully placed the bags of goodies on the counter, trying to make as little noise as possible. He then tiptoed towards the bedroom, thinking that Cynthia was probably fast asleep. But when he gently pushed open the door, he was surprised to find that she wasn't there. Gary felt a sudden pang of worry. He wondered where his wife could be at this time of night. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Gary felt confused when he tried to call Cynthia, but her phone wasn't working. He found it strange because she had moved to this town from another place and didn't know many people. Also, she didn't have a job at the moment, so Gary couldn't think of any colleagues she might have gone to. Cynthia had been searching for a job for some time now, but unfortunately, she hadn't been able to find one yet. As Gary continued to wonder where she could be, he couldn't seem to come up with an answer. He tried calling her multiple times, but her phone was still out of coverage. Feeling worried, Gary decided to put away all the groceries he had bought earlier into the fridge. He then decided to make their home look festive and cheerful by decorating the Christmas tree with some toys and garlands. Gary was starting to feel more nervous and worried as time went by without any sign of Cynthia. However, he suddenly had a thought that maybe she had gone to the store. He remembered that he had transferred her some money last night and had asked her to get something for herself. That's it. She loves perfume. She must have gone to get her a present, Gary cheered up. He felt relieved and went back to prepare the table for their New Year celebration. He put all the dishes on the table and made sure everything was ready for their festive meal. His friend Sam had borrowed his car while he was away on his business trip. He needed to get the car back for tomorrow, so he decided to walk over to Sam's apartment, which was just a few blocks away. When he got to Sam's apartment building, he rang the doorbell, but nobody answered. He noticed that his car was parked outside the building, but he couldn't see any signs of Sam. Gary noticed that the lights were on inside. He must be watching TV or something, he thought. Gary felt relieved when Sam finally opened the door. However, he could tell that something was off with Sam's behavior. Sam looked surprised to see him and seemed nervous, which made Gary feel even more curious and concerned. Hey Sam, good to see you. Listen, I need the car. I gotta run some errands tomorrow, Gary said, trying to hide his unease. Sam looked down at his feet and shuffled around uncomfortably. Oh, right, your car. What are you doing here? I thought you were away till next week. Sam trailed off, looking more nervous by the second. How do you know I was supposed to be back next week? Gary smiled. Can I come in? I'm Gary, your friend, remember? Gary laughed. Sam looked extremely nervous and uneasy as Gary entered his apartment. Gary asked if everything was alright, but Sam didn't respond. As Gary hung up his coat, he noticed Cynthia's fur coat in the wardrobe, which immediately raised his suspicion. He made his way to the bedroom and swung the door open, only to find Cynthia lying half naked on Sam's bed, the sheets covering her body. She let out a blood-curdling scream and covered her face when she saw Gary. Gary turned around, slammed the door, and marched back to the wardrobe.
He ripped off his coat and snatched the car keys from the shelf. Sam was standing by the front door, but when Gary reached him, he halted and confronted him. Suddenly, a furious punch sent Sam crashing to the floor. He groaned in agony as he clutched his cheek. Gary walked towards his car, and as he approached, he noticed that there was a basket placed on the hood of the car. Just as he was about to inspect it, he saw a woman hastily running away from the car. "Excuse me, is that your thing on the hood?" Gary shouted at the woman. He was curious and wanted to chase her down to know more, but he had his own issues to deal with. As he neared his car, he heard a baby coo. As he leaned on what turned out to be a carry cot, he discovered that there was a baby inside it. Gary was now faced with a bigger problem. He tried to chase after the woman who had left the carry cot on his car, but she was nowhere in sight. He searched around the block but couldn't find her. He returned to his car and placed the carry cot with the baby on the back seat. Feeling panicked, he decided to head to the closest police station to report the incident. It was already 4 hours before the new year, a time when nobody was eager to work. The officer was heard muttering to himself, "Oh my God, not on my shift?" Gary was asked to wait. "Why do I have to wait? I mean, this is not my baby. Someone left it on the hood of my car." Gary was lamenting, but the officer disappeared around the corner in the hallway. Gary understood that he won't get any help soon, so he decided to do something. He opened the cover of the carry cot and saw some papers, a birth certificate, and a note inside a folder. "Your baby, your responsibilities, the note said. Gary looked at the birth certificate and called his friend Tom, who worked for the agency. He asked Tom to check the database for information on the mother by using her name. "Gary, it's a few hours before New Year's. Are you crazy?" Tom chuckled. "Yeah, I know, but things aren't going well over here. I really need your help, Tom. I've never asked you for anything like this before. It's urgent," Gary pleaded. "You never change, Gary. You're still out there trying to save the world," Tom remarked and hung up the phone. In about 10 minutes, Tom got back to Gary with an address. Gary thanked Tom and headed there. Nobody answered the door. The apartment was giving off a smell of natural gas. He kicked the door and got in. He put the carry cot down on the stairs and ran through the apartment, covering his face with his coat. In the kitchen, a young woman sat on the floor, silently weeping. "What the hell is wrong with you? We need to get out of here." Gary turned the gas switch off, opened the window, and helped the woman get on her feet. He quickly led her out of the apartment and sat her down on the stairs. As she looked up at him, he met her gaze. "Can you walk?" Gary shouted angrily. The woman nodded, frightened. Gary picked up the carry cot with the baby that had already been crying. "Follow me," so that she wouldn't have any chances to object. He led her to the car, put the carry cot next to her, and drove to his house. Having let the stranger with the baby in his house, Gary noticed that the woman looked like she hadn't been eating well. She also looked like she hadn't slept for a while. He pointed to her room and got her a glass of water. She gulped the water hungrily and raised her eyes. "Why did you get me out of there?" she asked. "Wow, are you saying you don't understand why I got you out of there?" Gary was getting angry. "I don't want to live like this anymore. I really don't," she replied quietly. "What the heck is wrong with you people?" Gary was upset. "Then why did you leave your baby on my car?" Gary asked. "That was meant for Sam. I thought it was his car," the woman said quietly. "Well, that's my car, alright? Sam just borrowed it while I was away." "I hate him. I hate his guts. He's such a jerk," she cried. "Well, I guess that makes two of us. I don't like him either now. You can go ahead and use the bathroom. You'll tell me everything later." "What's your name, by the way?" "Martina," the woman replied. "Pretty name. Are you from South America by any chance?" "No, my parents, they loved the character from a show." She washed her face, came back and sat on the sofa and asked for more water. Gary brought her a glass of water and she started to tell her story. Martina said that she had been working under Sam's supervision. They had started going out and he had promised to take care of her and even marry her. On her birthday, Sam invited Martina to his place and they had dinner. There were flowers and candles. He was so romantic. Martina had never had alcohol before. She got drunk quite fast and started to feel dizzy. When she woke up in the morning, she realized she had slept in his bed. Martina admitted that she used to be a shy girl and had never had a boyfriend before Sam. Sam eventually started to neglect her, leaving Martina feeling upset and distressed. What happened at Sam's place had left her in turmoil, as it was not what she had expected or hoped for. Martina had always planned to wait until marriage before being intimate with anyone and felt guilty about what had occurred. When she found out that she was pregnant, she approached Sam, but he refused to acknowledge any responsibility, claiming that it was not his concern. Martina expressed that she had initially decided to have an abortion and had arranged everything, including finding a clinic. However, when the day of the procedure arrived, she couldn't bring herself to go through with it and fled from the clinic. "I just couldn't bring myself to kill a living being," Martina sobbed, her shoulders shaking softly. Gary felt sorry for her, and his anger towards his former friend intensified. "When my parents noticed my belly, they kicked me out. They told me to give up the baby for adoption. I couldn't do that either," Martina continued her story. Martina explained that some kind people had helped her with clothes for the baby. She went to her grandma's house after giving birth, but her parents found out and gave her an ultimatum: get rid of the baby or leave. Martina wiped her tears and said she didn't know what to do because she had no money or place to go, so she had to call Sam again. Sam told her to forget about him and never call him again. Gary sighed heavily. He couldn't believe that Sam, his friend all the way from high school, could actually turn out to be such a cruel person. Martina kept crying. "Alright, that's enough now. Please calm down," Gary asked her. The baby started to cry as well, and Martina stood up and picked it up. "I don't even have spare clothes for the baby. I think he's wet," Martina cried again. Gary noticed how tenderly she was looking at the baby, and it made him feel sorry. "Let me see what we can do about it," Gary said, and quickly walked away. He came back with a box of old clothes. "Here, it's my nephew's stuff in there. My sister moved out of here recently. She forgot her son's clothes. There should be enough." Martina looked at Gary and whispered, "Thank you so much." She hugged the baby tightly to her chest and burst into tears again. "I'm sorry, my little baby. I'm so sorry. I love you so much. I will never leave you. Please forgive me. I was a fool. I will never forgive myself for what I had done." Martina was crying, holding her baby to her chest. Gary looked at his watch. Midnight was not too far away. "It's almost New Year's and we should celebrate. Why don't you go ahead and change the baby's clothes? You can use my sister's clothes if you need to," Gary suggested. Gary went to the kitchen and retrieved all the bags from the fridge. He then proceeded to take the food out of the containers and arrange them onto plates. "Are you guys ready?" Gary shouted from the kitchen. "Yes, I'm feeding my son," Martina answered, and a little later added, "I guess he was hungry. He fell asleep right away." "Will you help me put these on the table then?" Gary asked. Martina came out and lowered her head. "Thank you so much for everything. I don't even know what would happen if you didn't come after me." "It's good that you understand," Gary smiled. The table was ready. Champagne glittered in the glasses. Klaus and Great was on TV. "Well, Happy New Year, Martina. I'm Gary, by the way." Martina smiled for the first time and nodded. "Happy New Year." As the baby slept soundly, Gary and Martina had a long conversation until early morning. This made him realize that he had been too quick to judge her before. Martina seemed gentle and innocent. Gary offered her to stay at his place for some time, since his 3-bedroom apartment was too big for him alone. Martina was too surprised to respond and just blushed. Gary went on to another business trip the next day, leaving Martina the keys to his apartment and some money to take care of her son. When he returned a week later, he found the apartment was very tidy and there was a delicious dinner on the table. However, he was even more surprised when Martina told him that she had not spent all the money he had given her. "How did you survive?" Gary wondered. "I was buying the cheapest and most necessary groceries. Thank you so much. I just didn't want to be a burden," Martina said and handed back the rest of the money. Gary couldn't believe how quickly things had changed for him. He was getting promoted at work, and this was going to be his last business trip, at least for the time being. He found it amusing how life could take unexpected turns. Martina and her son stayed in Gary's apartment for about 10 more days. One morning, she woke up early and began packing her things, getting ready to leave. She put her son's clothes, which Gary had given her, in the carry cot. Martina made breakfast for Gary and sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee and waiting for him to wake up. She was already dressed to leave. When Gary woke up and went to the kitchen, he saw Martina and the baby in the carry cot, and his heart skipped a beat. Even though it had only been a couple of weeks, he had grown accustomed to their presence. "Good morning. What's going on? Where are you guys going?" Gary asked Martina. "Gary, I can't stay here forever. I gotta get going. I'm so embarrassed. You've been too nice to us, and I can't even repay you, she said, and tears welled up in her eyes. Gary's initial sadness was replaced by a deep sense of affection for Martina and her son. He walked over to her and gave her a warm embrace, holding her tightly. After a few moments, he spoke softly. You know, it's funny, but being with you and your son has brought me so much peace and happiness. I've never felt so attached to my home before. You've made it such a warm and comforting place to be, and I really don't want you to go. Martina looked up and smiled. After 5 years, Gary, Martina, Johnny, and little Sophia were enjoying their time at the park. They noticed a man sitting on the bench, wearing a tattered sweatshirt and appearing desolate. As he gazed at their family, his eyes shifted from Gary to Martina to the kids. Suddenly, the man got up and walked towards them. They were all astonished to see that it was Sam. Gary? Martina? You two together? Who could have thought? Sam said and started coughing. As he glanced over at the children, his eyes lingered on Johnny. As he pieced together the similarities between himself and Johnny, his heart swelled with emotion and he couldn't contain his feelings any longer. With tears streaming down his face, he fell to the ground and shielded his face with his hands, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions that had taken hold of him. Dad, who is this man? Johnny asked. Gary paused for a moment, gazing thoughtfully at Sam. Then his eyes shifted to Johnny as he spoke with a gentle tone. That's Uncle Sam. He's been through some tough times in his life. He turned to his family and smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, you guys go ahead. I'll catch up with you in a moment. Gary led Sam to the side and told him something, after which Sam hugged Gary and quickly walked away. What did you tell him? Martina asked. Well, I gave him the words he needed to hear. With a loving kiss, Gary took the hands of their children and they continued on their journey, filled with joy and contentment.
Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Sometimes Victoria felt like her own life was an endless day of groundhogs. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, nothing changes. She runs from dawn to dusk, like a squirrel in a wheel, at lightning speed, and yet, no matter how fast she runs, she stays in the same place. However, from the outside everything looked quite well. Victoria had nothing to complain about. Her family was almost a model family, a faithful, loving husband, and cherished children. A small, but their own apartment. Inexpensive, but comfortable car. And a small but steady paycheck at a boring but reliable routine job. Victoria never complained because many other people had much worse lives. Some friends envied Victoria and sighed. Victoria, you are so lucky. Alejandro loves you very much, colleagues respect you, Dahlia is an A student, the pride of the class, and Pablo is an obedient and smart boy. Other women have husbands who drink heavily, cheat on them, and beat them, their kids are stupid bullies, and they have to pay off loans. And still, sometimes Victoria just wanted to cry out in helplessness and sadness. Would nothing interesting or surprising ever happen in her life again? Will her life now always be so drab and monotonous? It seemed to Victoria that there was nothing else ahead of her. But as people say, be careful what you wish for, you might get it. If only Victoria could imagine how much her life would change literally overnight, how her whole normal world would be turned upside down, she would never have complained about fate and waited for change. That morning nothing foretold trouble. Mom, Dahlia said quietly at breakfast, kissing her on the cheek, can you give me some money? The girls and I want to go to a pizzeria after school today and celebrate the beginning of the summer break. Victoria sighed heavily. She didn't have much money left, it would only be enough to buy groceries. On the other hand, she knew how important it was for her daughter could not be worse than others. They wanted to go to the pizzeria, and Dahlia had to go with them, too, so she wouldn't look like an outcast. Although her husband is supposed to get his paycheck just today. Okay, I'll handle it all somehow, Victoria decided and took her purse. Here you go, she held out the banknotes to her daughter. Just don't hang out too long. Come home for dinner. Mom, Dahlia complained, I'm not a little girl. Victoria smiled as she looked at her daughter. At 14, you already feel so independent and grown up. Her son Pablo had been coughing suspiciously since this morning, and Victoria shook her head in frustration. He had only been in kindergarten for a week. Could she go on sick leave again? She hurriedly slipped the thermometer under his armpit, anxiously looking at her watch to make sure she wasn't too late. She would have to stop at the pharmacy before work to buy medicine, and then she would take the usual route, take Pablo to the kindergarten, then run to the bus stop, and after that spend another half an hour in the overcrowded, stuffy bus, tightly pressed against the bodies of other passengers. Her husband left for the office very early, so he couldn't give her a ride, but Victoria was used to doing everything herself. At work, Ida, an activist in the accounting department, was collecting money for a gift and flowers for their boss whose birthday was coming up. The boss's birthday is coming up. We should chip in for a gift, she announced. Victoria sighed heavily again. It seemed as if everyone had colluded to leave her without money today, but still, she took her purse without complaint and gave Ida money. She hoped her husband had already received his paycheck. Alejandro, she texted him on Messenger, if you got the money already, send some to my card. I need to go to the grocery store and the pharmacy. Pablo is sick. Her husband read the message but didn't respond. Victoria didn't pay much attention to it. He didn't answer, but he read the message. Now he knows that she needs the money, so he will transfer it to her today. However, the workday was coming to an end, but her husband never transferred the money to Victoria. Did you get your paycheck or not? She texted him. But this time her husband didn't even read the message. Is he really that busy? Victoria got worried. She checked her account a few more times before the end of the day, but there was no transfer, not even a message from Alejandro. Did something happen? Worried, she dialed his number, but his phone was turned off. At this point, Victoria became really scared. What had happened to her husband? Where is he? Why was his phone turned off? Barely making it to the end of the day, she rushed home. She even had to borrow some money from a colleague to buy medicine and groceries. Pablo was sick after all. The kindergarten teacher told Victoria that the boy was weak all day, didn't eat well, coughed often, and by the end of the day, he had a fever. At home, after putting her son to bed and giving him medication, Victoria began to make dinner quickly, trying to call her husband from time to time. His phone was still off. Maybe the battery died? She even dialed her mother-in-law's number just in case. Good evening, Margarita Perez. Did Alejandro happen to stop by today? I can't reach him. He is not answering my messages and he is still not home. No, he hasn't even called today, her mother-in-law said, not even hiding her hatred for Victoria. She sounded as if she was happy that her son's family was in trouble. She didn't like her daughter-in-law much, but she tolerated her, and Victoria paid her back in kind, though both kept a polite neutrality when they met. Getting over herself, Victoria asked her mother-in-law, "If he does show up at your place, please tell him to call me right away." It was getting dark, and her husband still wasn't home. Dahlia had already returned from the pizzeria. "Mom," she shouted from the hallway. "I ran out of money, so I borrowed some from the girls. I said I would pay them back tomorrow." Victoria exclaimed, "Dahlia, you're just cutting me without a knife." Nerves were already on edge, and her daughter made her even more nervous. Dahlia immediately frowned. "Why are you so stingy?" "I didn't ask much, did I?" Victoria only shook her head helplessly. It was late at night, but her husband still hadn't come home. She didn't know what to do. She imagined terrible pictures. He had been attacked, robbed, beaten, or maybe he got in an accident. At 10 p.m. the key creaked in the door lock. Victoria rushed into the hallway, feeling great relief. He had come, so at least he was alive. Now she would scold him for making her worry so much. However, when Victoria saw her husband's face, all the angry words she wanted to say disappeared from her mind. Alejandro was as pale as death, his expression was like a frozen mask. She rushed to hug him in fear. "Alejandro, I was very worried. Where were you? What happened?" Her husband indifferently allowed Victoria to hug him. He didn't even try to take off his jacket, or at least take off his shoes. "Victoria," he finally said with a dry mouth, "Victoria, if you only knew what I have done." Victoria felt cold. She tried to understand what he could have done. Cheated on her? Murdered someone? What happened? Tell me. Alejandro covered his face with his hands. "I lost a large sum of money." Victoria was dumbfounded, not immediately knowing what he was talking about, and when she realized, she gasped. "Alejandro, you promised me that you would never gamble again in your life," she exclaimed. Her husband lowered his head guiltily. Victoria almost cried, looking at his drooping shoulders. She was already tired of fighting this plague, a passion for gambling. When they first met, Alejandro was a heavy gambler. It was absolutely impossible to stop him from playing. She started to re-educate him, which took more than a year. Sometimes her husband could lose all of his earnings in a single night. Victoria cried, screamed, swore, took him to psychologists, and threatened divorce. But this obsession was stronger than him. However, when Dahlia was born, he stopped, as if fatherhood had blocked this wicked obsession. For many years he did not even think of gambling. Victoria had already thought they had turned over the gambling page of his life and forgotten it as a bad dream. But it happened again, so suddenly. So it is true that there are no ex-gamblers, just as there are no ex-alcoholics. Trying not to show her despair, she asked in a calm voice, "How much did you lose?" He shook his head as if he couldn't bear to even think about it. A lot. How much?" Victoria repeated with pressure. Her husband put his arms around his head and started making excuses. "I swear, Victoria, I don't know how it happened," as if I had lost my mind. "Everything was going great at first. I was so lucky, I'd already won a lot of money. But then suddenly I lost it all. Do we have to borrow money from someone? Get another loan?" she asked in a shaky voice. Alejandro shook his head with a painful grimace. "Do not be silent. Say something." Victoria shouted angrily. "Can you just tell me the truth? Do we have to sell your car, our apartment?" The husband shook his head again and finally mumbled out, "Victoria, I'm sorry, but it's not just about the money. I lost you." At first, she thought she'd misheard. Then she thought it was just a bad joke. "What are you talking about? Lost me? How is that even possible?" "I'm a human being," she said nervously. She thought her husband was going to laugh, hug her, and say something like, "It was a joke, smile, you're being filmed by a hidden camera." However, Alejandro was deadly serious. He looked at Victoria and said, "It turned out that my boss likes you very much. Remember, you came to the party with me. He noticed you back then and said he still couldn't get you out of his head. He forced me to gamble. Honestly, Victoria, it's not my fault. And when I lost, he said he'd forget about my debt if you came to him tonight. Do you even understand what you're saying?" she asked in frustration. "So you want me to sleep with your boss for money?" He lowered his eyes to avoid looking at his wife. "But we don't have a choice, honey. If I don't do what he said, I'll be in debt, or even in jail. If you don't do it, we'll lose everything, the car, the apartment, absolutely everything. Please don't be so selfish and think about our children. Do they deserve this?" Victoria was speechless for a moment. "Think about our children. Did you think of the children yourself when you decided to gamble again? Please," Alejandro suddenly knelt in front of her, "I beg you, save me, Victoria, save us. If you don't, I'll kill myself, I swear." Tears came to his eyes. He tried to take her hand and kiss it. Victoria was in shock. It seemed to her that she was just watching a movie, that she was looking not at her husband, but at a stranger on the screen. And he was a stranger, as it turned out. She had no idea how far his meanness could reach. "I swear I will love you till I die. I will carry you in my arms. I will do anything you say." Alejandro swore fervently. I'll never gamble again. I'd rather poke my eyes out and cut off my hands. Please, honey, help me out, just once. I beg you. Victoria squeamishly took his hands off her lap. Get up off the floor, don't humiliate yourself, she said. And be quiet, or you'll wake the children. I don't want them to see this shit. The husband blinked his eyes miserably. So what have you decided, Victoria? She closed her eyes, not believing in what she was saying, but she pulled herself together and said, I will go to your boss. Alejandro exhaled with relief, and there was such an unconcealed expression of happiness on his face that Victoria wanted to punch him, or at least spit right in his face. Just wear something sexy, you know? He muttered, without looking her in the eyes. Put on some makeup, some perfume, you know. Victoria became angry and joked bitterly. Maybe you can also tell me what underwear is better to wear. You know what sets of underwear I have, so help me choose, so as not to disappoint your boss. Her husband immediately shut up, fearing that she was about to get angry and change her mind. Victoria decided to wear a long black dress. It wasn't vulgar, but it tightened her body like a glove. Her hair fell to her shoulders, she touched her lips slightly with dark red lipstick. Are you ready? Alejandro fussed when he saw her. Just a minute, I'll call him now. And in a few moments, he was already talking to the boss in a friendly way. Hello, Maximo Lorenzo, it's me, Ortiz. Yes, I told her. Yes, she's ready. You promised to send a driver. Okay. Okay, I got it. When he finished talking, he turned to Victoria. The driver will be here soon, take you to the place, and then, he hesitated for a moment, then bring you back. Victoria did not react to his words. She had no strength to stay in the same room with her husband even for an extra second. She was disgusted to look at him. I'll wait downstairs, she said. Victoria, I hope you're not going to run away. Please think of us, of the children. Alejandro said, frightened, but immediately shut up. Victoria shook her head bitterly. Unfortunately, I have nowhere to run to. The car pulled up in front of the house just 5 minutes later. The driver gallantly opened the door for her, and Victoria sat in the back seat. It started to rain. Looking at the raindrops on the window, she thought, even the weather is mourning me. They drove through the city for about half an hour. Finally, the car pulled up outside the gates of a luxurious mansion. The driver opened the door and walked the woman to the house, holding an umbrella over her head, as gallantly as before. Come in, he said, Maximo Lorenzo is waiting for you. Victoria hesitantly crossed the threshold and stopped, looking around, not knowing where to go. She could not believe that it was real, that it was not just a nightmare. She really wanted to wake up and realize that nothing had happened, that her life was still drab and boring. Maybe I should have gotten drunk, she thought, but it was too late. If I got drunk, I wouldn't feel so disgusted and so ashamed. Victoria, come into the dining room, she heard a voice and turned around at the sound. She did not remember her husband's boss, Maximo. But now, looking at the young, handsome man in the stylish suit, she suddenly realized. She danced with him at that ill-fated party where they met. That's when he noticed her. Why on earth did she go with her husband to that party? At the time, she couldn't have imagined how one innocent dance she didn't even remember would ruin her life. Hello, the man said, looking at her with deep gray eyes. Victoria was frightened, thinking he was going to take her right now, and took a step back. Maximo recognized her fear and smiled. Don't be afraid, let's have dinner first. Victoria felt nausea. I'm not hungry, she said, and then, shaking her hair and looking desperately into his eyes, she added firmly, let's just do it, and forget about it forever. Maximo smiled slightly. We're in no hurry. We have the whole night ahead of us. Victoria clenched her fists with such force that her nails dug into her palms. I hate it, I hate him. I hate them both. Pounded in her temples. But if you're not hungry, I don't insist, the boss suggested. You don't have to eat, but at least drink something. Yeah, I'd drink something strong, Victoria said quickly. She was afraid that she simply could not do what he expected her to do when she was sober. Let's go, he invited her gallantly. Maximo walked her into the living room, where a table was set for two, candles were lit, and the fire in the fireplace was crackling. The atmosphere seemed cozy, but Victoria didn't notice it under these circumstances. Once at the table, Maximo gallantly pulled back a chair for the lady. He sat down opposite her and opened a bottle of sparkling wine. The king of Saudi Arabia gave me this wine, he said so calmly as if he were talking about some neighbor guy. He made me promise that I would open this bottle and drink it only with my wife. So why didn't you keep your promise? Victoria asked indifferently. Frankly, she didn't care at all. I have no wife, said Maximo. So why not drink it with a woman I really like? Victoria laughed wryly. Mr. Lorenzo, you have odd conceptions of affection for women, though. You gamble to win a night with a woman you like. If I have no other way to get close to her, why not? He responded calmly. Then Maximo poured the wine into glasses and approached Victoria. She tensed visibly again and automatically leaned back in her chair. Do not be afraid, Victoria, I don't bite. And please, call me Maximo, he suggested. After all, soon we will become closer to each other. She bit her lip. Well, whatever you say, Maximo, she replied. He added calmly. You forgot to add, yes, master. Victoria opened her mouth in shock and frowned. Seriously? But he laughed. I'm just kidding. You look like you're afraid I'm about to throw you a party with chains, whips, and blindfolds. Relax. I promise you, I'm not who you think I am. She shrugged her shoulders. I don't think of you at all. You're very beautiful, but for some reason, you're wearing black, like you're in mourning. Victoria hesitated a little, but then responded honestly. I am in mourning. Really? Who did you bury? He asked. She grinned bitterly. The old me, the one I was before today. After a second, she felt a light touch on her hair. Wow, he stroked her head as if she were a little girl. Don't be so dramatic, maybe the new you will be even better than the old you. To hide her confusion, Victoria hurriedly sipped her wine. She didn't understand Maximo's desire to make small talk with her. After all, she didn't come here to have dinner and talk. She thought it would be funny if he asked her to dance, like at that party. But that's exactly what he did. Shall we dance? Yes, master, she returned the joke to him. He laughed heartily. You're funny. But Victoria wasn't laughing. After placing his glass on the table, Maximo clicked the buttons on some remote control, and a soft, pleasant melody began to play. He walked over, bowed his head, and held out his hand, inviting her to dance. She obediently stood up, feeling her legs shake. Maximo put his arm around her waist and led her in a slow romantic dance. Victoria told herself that she hated him with all her soul. She must hate him. This man humiliated her husband and trampled her in the dirt. He believes that he can buy anything and anyone. Nobody will ever refuse him, and he knows it. Master of life. The damn mighty king. She tried to make herself hate Maximo, but she failed. She actually wished he would have given her the slightest reason to hate him, like trying to kiss her. Then she would have been able to call him a vile, lustful, ruthless, self-righteous man. But Maximo had been extremely gallant to her. He didn't take his eyes off her, almost burning her with his eyes, but he didn't cross the line. Now Victoria felt much more hatred toward her husband. He was the reason she was here now with Maximo. He is the one who had set her up, who had given her to his boss. When she thought of her husband, tears came to her eyes, but she blinked hastily to hide them. Is something wrong? Maximo asked worriedly, noticing the change in her expression. Look, Victoria said, why are you trying to play kindness and generosity with me? Why all this wine and dinner and compliments and dancing? Why? He shrugged his shoulders. Maybe because I want you to like me? It's useless, she exhaled. Am I really disgusting? The corners of his lips went up. Yes, that's what she wanted to say, but she realized that it wasn't true. Maximo wasn't disgusting. He wasn't acting as she expected. She thought that pain, shame, and humiliation awaited her, but in fact, she had nothing to complain about so far. She felt no hatred toward Maximo, and she was mad at herself for it. This man is the enemy, he ruined her family, and he ruined her marriage. Victoria will never be able to hug her husband now, nor will she be able to look him in the eye. Can we get to the point? She asked sharply. Are you in a hurry to go somewhere? Home, Victoria answered. I have children there, and tomorrow I have to work. In the morning I will take you to work, he promised, but now you are mine. Even if it's just for one night, but you are mine. You agreed to this, didn't you? Then why aren't you doing anything? Victoria's lips quivered. She could hardly hold back her tears, so she grabbed her glass and gulped down the rest of the wine. I wanted to just do it and forget about it. Forever. I don't think you're ready yet, he smiled and poured her more wine. I really like you, so I won't do anything against your will. Anything that happens between us will only happen with your consent. Are you mocking me? Victoria was shocked. What kind of stupid game is this? You act like we're on a date, and like you have no idea why I'm here. I'm here to save my husband. Your husband is pathetic, Maximo said in a calm voice. Victoria flared up like a match. You have no right to talk about him like that. It was you forced him to gamble. And if I hadn't agreed, he might have ended up in jail or killed himself. Then let him kill himself, Maximo said calmly and ruthlessly. Think about it, he chose to sacrifice you, not himself. He preferred to shift the responsibility for his idiocy onto your delicate shoulders. And how does he feel now? I guess he's sleeping soundly while his wife. Shut up! Victoria shouted. Maximo shook his head. Why won't you face the truth? Your husband is a coward and a traitor. He set you up, and he will do it again if he has to. You'd better not test my patience, she took a plate from the table. If you don't stop, I promise I'll throw it at you. It seemed that the whole situation was amusing to him. Well, try it, he suggested. I have many plates. Victoria threw it, but at the last moment her hand shook, and the plate fell to the floor right at Maximo's feet, falling and smashing to pieces. And suddenly all of Victoria's strength was gone at once. She dropped to the floor like a broken plate, covered her face with her hands, and wept. She didn't even realize right away that Maximo sat down beside her, put his arm around her shoulders, and held her head against his chest. And she felt so good, cozy and safe in his arms, that she cried even more bitterly, the way she had cried only when she was a child. It's okay. Calm down, my dear, he whispered, stroking her hair. You're very brave, but you're so scared and desperate. Don't be afraid. I won't do anything bad to you, nothing you or I would regret. I'm so tired, Victoria sobbed, pressing her face into his chest. Tired of being strong, tired of solving other people's problems. I know. You just need to get some rest, get some sleep. Let's go. She looked up at him with frightened, crying eyes. Don't be afraid. You'll just go to sleep, he stroked her cheek, wiping away the tears. I won't touch you, I promise. Victoria really did get a good night's sleep, for the first time in years. She slept in the guest bedroom. The bed was wide, comfortable, and soft, and the white linens smelled delightful. And a bottle of water and a plate of fruit had been left for her on the nightstand beside the bed. She slept in Maximo's t-shirt. He apologized that there were no female clothes in the house, but assured her that the t-shirt was new and clean. All night long she had wonderful and kind dreams. Victoria even woke up with a smile on her face and lay there, stretching and relaxing, until she remembered yesterday's events. It was as if a cold wave hit her. Victoria sat up abruptly on the bed and looked around. Colorful images flashed before her eyes and changed like a kaleidoscope. First, she tried to call her husband in vain. Then he comes home and begins to sob, begging Victoria to save him. Next, she arrives at the Maximo mansion in a black dress. They dance, and then she cries on his chest. Lord, did it really happen to her yesterday? Victoria frightenedly pulled the blanket over her naked legs. She was alone in the bedroom, but maybe there were hidden cameras all over the bedroom. Thinking about hidden cameras, Victoria decided not to risk taking a shower. She just washed her face and brushed her teeth. She found her black dress on the back of a chair, quickly pulled it on, brushed her hair, and found her shoes under the bed. She wanted to get out of there as soon as possible and to forget everything that had happened as a bad dream. Yes, Maximo had not touched her yesterday and had promised he would not hurt her. But that means she hasn't fulfilled her obligations, and her husband still owes Maximo a lot of money. Or has Maximo forgiven him? But what if he changes his mind? Nervous and biting her lip, Victoria cautiously walked down the stairs, trying to look independent and proud, but still, she was embarrassed when she saw Maximo. He looked awake and fresh, nodding to her cheerfully. Good morning. Tea, coffee, juice? What do you want for breakfast? There are scrambled eggs and ham, toast, and some fresh pastries. Victoria's stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten anything since yesterday, but she hastened to say no. Thank you, but I am not hungry. Refusal is not accepted. Maximo shook his head. You haven't eaten anything. You're already trembling. You have to eat something or you'll faint. She took a few bites from the croissant, took a sip of coffee, and got up from the table. Please, Maximo, can I go home? I'm not stopping you, he shrugged. The driver will take you home. After hesitating, Victoria finally decided to ask what worried her the most. What about the debt? Tell your husband that he owes me nothing, Maximo said coldly. It felt as if a mountain had been lifted from her shoulders. Thank you very much. Are you so worried about him? Victoria thought for a moment there was a hint of jealousy in his voice. He is not worth even your finger. Victoria decided not to talk about it. She came home quite early. The children were still asleep, but her husband was waiting for her. When she entered the hallway, he rushed to her, and he peered at her face, greedily and jealously, as if trying to find traces of the night's adultery. I'm so sorry, he muttered apologetically, meeting Victoria's gaze. But he was anxious to clarify. Have you done everything he asked? Victoria felt so disgusted that she even wanted to take a shower. Don't worry, she sighed wearily. You are no longer in danger. Seeing her husband exhale with a noticeable relief, she hurried to leave, so as not to see his face. He was really pissing her off right now. I'm going to take a shower, she said. Alejandro pondered and uttered sadly. Yeah, I'm afraid after everything that happened last night, you won't be able to wash all that dirt off you anytime soon. Victoria stopped, shocked by his words. Is she the one who won't be able to wash herself off? So she's the one to blame for what happened? What did you say? She asked him quietly. Say it again. That's not what I meant, he said, anxious. But now we have to live with it. I don't think I can forget it. But I don't blame you, I forgive you. Victoria got angry. Forgive me? Forgive me? You're just a pathetic bastard. She swung and slapped him on the cheek. The slap made her husband flinch, but he didn't even move, just rubbed his cheek silently, apparently realizing he deserved it. What if your boss wanted our daughter instead of me? Victoria asked quietly. Would you do that, too, to save yourself? He recoiled from her with his eyes full of horror. How can you say such a thing? Dahlia is our daughter, I love her, and I would never do that to her. Victoria shook her head. You told me you loved me, too. And yet you gave me to this predator as if I were a piece of fresh meat. You're a disgusting bastard. Alejandro twitched at her words as if she had hit him again. Fortunately, he was smart enough to remain silent. Victoria stood in the shower, shivering from the icy water until her lips turned blue. She wanted to wash that dirt off of her. No, she didn't want to wash away the memory of Maximo, especially since he hadn't done anything to her. She wanted to wash away the disgusting, sticky feeling that Alejandro had betrayed her. She couldn't get Maximo's words out of her head that someone who betrayed her once would betray her again and again. There was no guarantee he wouldn't do it again. Wrapping herself in a towel, she stepped out of the shower and headed to her husband. "Promise me," she uttered, "promise me that you will never gamble again." At first, she wanted to ask him to swear by the health of their children, but something stopped her. Subconsciously, she didn't trust him. "I swear," Alejandro assured her with sincere eyes. "That I never again." Victoria closed her eyes tiredly. She wanted to believe him. "Okay," she sighed, "get ready for work, I'll make you breakfast." She needed to forget everything that had happened to her at Maximo's. She had to try to live a normal, boring life again. She called her boss and asked for a day off because her son was sick. This was true. Pablo was still coughing and had a fever. So Victoria decided to call the doctor. But even if Pablo had been healthy, she wouldn't have been able to come into the office today as if nothing had happened, to perform her daily duties, to chat with her coworkers, to smile. She didn't want to see anyone. Victoria sincerely hoped that she would be able to forget about what had happened. The days passed one by one. The husband was quiet and obedient. Maximo did not remind her of himself in any way. At first, Victoria was afraid that her husband's boss would harass her, but no, everything was quiet and calm. But things were not so good in their family. Despite Alejandro's perfect behavior, there was a coldness in their relationship. Both tried to behave as if nothing had happened. In public, they pretended to be a happy family, but there was no more sincerity, warmth, and love between them. In addition, Victoria noticed that Alejandro avoided touching her. At night, he even moved to the edge of the bed so that he would not touch his wife with his hand or foot in any way. It was unexpected and unpleasant. One day she could not stand it and asked, "What's the matter? Am I disgusting to you now?" "No, why do you even ask about it?" He assured her, hurriedly and insincerely. "How can you say that, Victoria? You are my savior. Then embrace me," she demanded. Alejandro was confused. "What?" "I said embrace me right now." Victoria, husband hesitated, but then forced himself to step closer and put his hand on her shoulder. She laughed. "I see. You don't want to touch a dirty whore, huh? Do you want to stay pure and innocent?" "Well, what did you expect?" her husband asked angrily. "You spent the night with my boss. After that, I can't touch you, I can't even think about it. I'm disgusted to look at you. But how do you communicate with Maximo after everything that happened? Do you find him disgusting too?" Victoria teased. "Or maybe the boss is something different and can shake his hand and smile friendly? What does Maximo Lorenzo have to do with anything?" The husband mumbled confusedly. "Okay," Victoria waved her hand. "Go to sleep, I don't want to see you." "What do you mean?" Victoria was silent for a few seconds, but then dared to say one important thing. "Alejandro," she asked him quietly, "let's divorce." She had no idea what would happen after she said that. Oaths of eternal love, tears, passionate kisses. Barely pulling away from his embrace, Victoria turned away and closed her eyes. Her life turned into some nightmare, became fake. Everything was fake in her life now. She was living with a man she no longer loved, not even respected, but only despised. Everything burned out in her soul, all her former feelings disappeared in just one rainy night. She had a desert inside her, she didn't want anything, and she didn't need anyone except her children. She tried to save this marriage just for the sake of the children. Victoria knew that Dahlia and Pablo would take their parents' divorce very hard. They loved their father. And she couldn't even tell them the truth. Clench your teeth and bear it, she told herself. You're not the first, you won't be the last to live in a loveless marriage. Accept it and endure it. But a few months later, when everything seemed to have calmed down and returned to normal, it happened again. Alejandro had lost a large sum of money again. It was like a recurring nightmare. It was pretty much the same scenario, her husband staying late at work, ignoring her calls and messages, then showing up at her doorstep looking guilty, sobbing, falling to his knees, and crying. Victoria, please save me. You are the only one in the whole world who can do it. My boss is completely obsessed with you. This time Victoria didn't even protest. She went silently into the bedroom to change and came out. Her husband looked at her in bewilderment. His wife put on simple jeans and a sweater. Are you going to seduce Maximo Lorenzo in jeans? He asked. Are you crazy? Couldn't you find something a little more sexy? A short skirt or at least a blouse with a deep neckline. You're not even wearing makeup. Don't worry, Victoria said in an innocent voice, your boss likes me in any outfit. Her husband turned red. What? He asked with a wicked squint. Is it just me, or did you enjoy that beautiful life? She nodded seriously. I enjoyed it, Alejandro, and I finally met a normal man. So thank you for this opportunity. You are just a slut. He choked with indignation. You're ready to sell your body to any rich man. Do you expect him to give you expensive gifts or take you on vacation? Do you have any objections? You're the one who pushed me into his arms. I see you don't mind. Alejandro said angrily. If you don't like it, I'm not going anywhere. Victoria pretended to take off her shoes. There's a chicken in the oven. I think I'll continue cooking dinner. Alejandro changed his face. No, please. He exclaimed in fright, and then he said sweetly, Victoria, sorry, that's not what I meant to say. Go to Maximo Lorenzo, make him happy. That make him happy almost made her vomit. Call your boss. She said with disdain, it's not nice to keep him waiting. Her husband immediately dialed the number, listened, nodded, and guaranteed that he understood everything. Maximo said that you would spend the whole weekend with him. The whole weekend? Victoria raised an eyebrow. He also said, Alejandro mumbled in confusion, he said you should take your passport with you. Victoria was surprised, but did not say anything. She silently took the passport out of the cabinet and put it in her purse. You can take the children to my mother for the weekend, she said. They will be happy. They have not seen their grandmother for a long time. Don't miss me, my love, Victoria added slyly and felt some malicious satisfaction at the way her husband's face twisted. Maximo was waiting for her at the gate of his mansion. He was also dressed quite simply in a sweater and jeans. He looked at her and nodded happily. That's a great outfit. It's like you felt we were going on a trip. Where to? Victoria asked curiously. To her surprise, she felt comfortable and cozy with Maximo. For some reason, she knew for sure that he would never hurt her or betray her. Surprise, he smiled. What countries have you been to? Only Turkey, Egypt, and once in Thailand many years ago, she answered embarrassedly. Well, then it's time for you to explore the world. Victoria was confused. But I don't have any visa. Relax, he smiled, the consul is my friend, they'll get you a visa in a minute. Did you take your passport? I did, she said, and couldn't help but joke. What would you do if I had no documents at all? Nothing is impossible for me, he assured her. We'd just get you a new passport in a couple of days. It seemed that nothing was really impossible for this man. First, they went to the embassy, then Maximo took her to the mall to buy new clothes, shoes, and accessories. Victoria didn't protest. She wanted to finally feel like a woman. It felt good to be taken care of, to be pampered. And then they headed to the airport. When Victoria saw the number of the flight, she gasped. Italy? Really? A beautiful place for sophisticated and romantic women like you, Maximo smiled at her. What makes you think I'm sophisticated and romantic? She objected, but she felt good, despite everything. Victoria, I just feel that you are very tender, vulnerable, and fragile, he said seriously, and then he looked at her in a way that made her cheeks flush. Victoria was embarrassed and lowered her eyes. They traveled in business class and had some champagne and strawberries during the flight. Victoria even managed to get some sleep because the reclining seats were so comfortable and spacious. The plane landed. Victoria was afraid that now she would wake up and this fairy tale would turn out to be just a beautiful dream. Venice, the most romantic place on earth. Everything that happened to her next was like a wonderful dream. They rode on gondolas along the canals and listened to serenades, enjoyed delicious coffee and the world-famous gelato ice cream, ate real Italian pizza, strolled along the narrow winding streets, and fed greedy pigeons in St. Mark's Square. And when their legs were aching with fatigue, Maximo suggested they go to a hotel. The hotel was luxurious. "This is your room," he said, "and I'll be in the next door if you need anything." Victoria was surprised by this politeness. He had booked 2 different rooms. "Get some rest," Maximo continued, "and then change into one of those dresses we bought. The opera is waiting for us. The famous tenor is giving his only concert tonight at the Teatro La Fenice." When they came back to the hotel at night, Victoria's head was full of wonderful impressions. Before saying good night to her, Maximo took her hand. Victoria immediately tensed, thinking, "Here we go, you have to pay for everything in life." Now he's going to start harassing her, luring her to his room and ruining all the charm of the day. But she was wrong. Maximo limited himself to simply kissing her fingertips, and then he said, "Thank you. It was the best day of my life." Victoria caught herself thinking that perhaps it was the best day of her life, too. She felt so good here, with him, she didn't even want to go back home. All good things come to an end, though. The next day the plane took them back home. Alejandro never forgave her for that weekend in Venice. Even though he forced her to sleep with his boss, he couldn't help thinking that Victoria seemed to be doing too well. And he, too, wanted to get more of the good things out of life. The last thing that finally ruined their relationship was that one day her husband asked her, "Look, maybe I should change my car, what do you think?" Victoria looked at him in confusion. "Why, do we have some extra money now?" "Well, we don't," he looked away. "But I think that it's not a problem for Maximo Lorenzo." "What does Maximo Lorenzo have to do with it?" Victoria didn't understand what he was talking about. "You should just give him a hint," her husband suggested. "Be nice to him, you know. Maybe he will not only buy me a car, but a house for us." Victoria looked at him in horror. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes, why not? Don't you understand, Alejandro? This is disgusting." "What's disgusting about it?" He answered with incomprehension. "You spent the night with him at least twice. You have nothing left to lose. You are out of your mind." She shouted. "Do you even understand what you're saying? Sleeping with him to save my husband is one thing, but going to bed with him because my husband wants a beautiful life, that's too much." "Yes, I want a beautiful life," Alejandro said. "Do you think you're the only one who deserves to spend weekends in Europe, live in luxury hotels, and drive around in expensive cars? I want that, too. And I want an expensive car. I want to travel around the world." "You're an asshole, Alejandro," Victoria shook her head. "Then why have you lived with such an asshole for so many years?" Her husband asked angrily. "You know, I don't even know why I've been living with you all this time." "I think it's time to stop this nonsense." Victoria turned off the faucet over the sink, where she was washing dishes, and wiped her hands. "You know, honey, it's time to hire a lawyer." "What for?" Alejandro didn't understand. Victoria grinned. "To get a divorce." She had no idea it would be so hard for her. Her husband was absolutely against the divorce and made a terrible scandal. Do you want to move in with your lover in his fancy mansion to wear diamonds and gold while the kids and I will live in poverty? Victoria just sighed wearily and shook her head. Stop talking nonsense. I'm not going to abandon my children. They will not live in poverty. And you're a big boy. You can take care of yourself. I'm not giving you the kids. Alejandro waved his finger threateningly in front of her nose. Don't even think about it. They shouldn't communicate with such a lecherous mother like you. I won't let some stupid slut raise my children. Victoria laughed. Seriously? You call me lecherous, and you pretend to be innocent. Do I have to remind you where it all started? Shut up. He turned red with anger. What do you call a woman who goes on a trip with her lover knowing that her husband and children are waiting for her at home? And what do you call a man who sells his wife to his boss? Victoria answered a question with a question. But her husband didn't hear her. He had lost control of his emotions. Sooner or later, you would have left me for Maximo. I'm sure you made up your mind back then, at that party, when you danced with that bastard. Don't even try to deny it. It was all your idea. You told him about my obsession with gambling, and you and Maximo planned it all together. You waited impatiently for me to lose so that you could rush to your rich lover. Victoria refused to believe her ears. What are you talking about? Yes, her husband kept yelling. I knew it. That was your plan. Victoria couldn't hear it anymore. She took her purse, put her jacket on, and left, unable to stay in the same apartment with her husband. Soon everyone learned that she had filed for divorce. But the offended Alejandro decided to tell the story of their marriage a little differently. It became clear to everyone, he is a poor, deceived husband, and she is a selfish, sneaky, cheating wife. Many mutual friends turned their backs on Victoria, not even saying hello to her when they met. Colleagues did not express their condemnation openly, but Victoria could now constantly hear the whispering and giggling behind her back. She tried to ignore the gossip, but she did not always succeed. Her mother-in-law kept saying that her son was living with a vile snake. The worst part was that all these dirty rumors reached even the children. At school, Dahlia's classmates did not hesitate to discuss her mother's affair with a local millionaire. Maximo was a well-known person. His name and pictures were constantly in the media. Dahlia, with her adolescent maximalism, shouted, "I hate you. How could you do this to Dad?" Victoria reached out to stroke her daughter's cheek, but she recoiled. "Someday you'll understand and maybe you'll stop judging me. I will never forgive you. You betrayed Daddy's love, you betrayed our family. I don't have a mother anymore." Victoria left, swallowing her tears. She knew that her daughter just needed time to think about everything. Even the kindergarten teachers looked at Victoria and whispered something to each other when she brought her son there every morning. But she tried to ignore it. Dahlia flatly refused to move into a rented apartment with her mother, staying with her father to support him after her mother's betrayal. But at least Pablo stayed with her. He was still a baby. He needed his mother, all the time, every day. Victoria's sister was the only one who knew the truth about Victoria and Maximo's affair. Victoria didn't dare to reveal the details of her scandalous divorce even to her mother. "Just tell Alejandro that you didn't sleep with Maximo," her sister suggested. "Maybe when he finds out that nothing happened between you, he will calm down a little." Victoria shook her head. "No. I wanted to tell him the truth, but after everything he said to me, I won't confess. I don't have to justify myself. He is the one who ruined our marriage. He humiliated me and lied to everyone about the circumstances of our divorce. And now I have to prove my innocence and beg for forgiveness?" "No," Victoria shook her head decisively. "If he likes to think that his wife is a fallen woman, let him keep thinking that. I will not prove anything to him. And I'm not even upset by the fact that all my friends have turned their backs on me. So they were never true friends." But, as it turned out, that was only the beginning. At work, the boss invited Victoria to her office and, awkwardly averting her eyes, asked her to quit. "Why?" She was dumbfounded. "I have always worked diligently, and I have never let you down. Victoria, you know all the dirty talk that's been going on about you. Did you believe the rumors, too? Victoria asked sneeringly. Well, let's just say there's no smoke without fire. I don't want all this dirt to affect our company. Our reputation is sacred. And you will scare away all our clients with your love affairs. I'm sorry. We are a serious company. Reputation comes first for me. Victoria only stared at her in shock. She quit the same day. She simply had no choice. Over the next months, she desperately tried to find a job, but to no avail. It turned out that it wasn't so easy when you were 35 and not 20 like the other applicants. She had some savings, but they were melting before her eyes. It was getting harder and harder to pay her rent. And she also had to eat something, pay for kindergarten, and buy winter clothes for the child. Victoria could wear her old boots and jacket, but Pablo grew out of his last year's clothes. And the new year was coming up, the kids' favorite holiday. She needed money to buy him presents. Victoria still had a few luxurious dresses, shoes, and an expensive handbag, which Maximo had bought for her before the trip to Italy. Victoria could have sold it all and made good money, but she hesitated. It wasn't nice to sell the gifts, even though she had nowhere to wear them. Don't be stupid, her sister told her. Call Maximo and ask him for money. I think he would be happy to help. You know me, Marissa. Victoria shook her head. I never ask anyone for anything. At first, she was a little upset that Maximo did not try to contact her, but gradually she calmed her wounded ego. Apparently, he was bored of seeking the attention of an ordinary old woman. Yes, Victoria considered herself an old, unattractive woman. He was probably tired of trying to win her over. It happens. But she's strong, she can get over it. Except she was afraid to confess, even to herself, that she missed Maximo. But since he hadn't tried to contact her in all these months, she certainly wouldn't impose on him. And she certainly won't ask him for help. Yeah, you're really stupid, her sister summed up. I can't stand to watch you suffer in this tiny rented apartment anymore. You could live in a mansion, like a queen, and celebrate the new year in the Maldives under a palm tree with mango in your hands. I don't think I'll ever travel to the Maldives, Victoria laughed sadly. Don't worry about me, I will make it. Thank God, I have arms and legs, I have a head, I'll find a way to earn money. The decision came unexpectedly. Victoria loved to cook, and she was quite good at it. She was especially good at all kinds of pastries, pies, and cakes. One day the landlady, Lucila Suarez, a cheerful retiree, stopped by to get the payment for the previous month. Victoria was just about to have tea with Pablo. She invited Lucila to the table, and Lucila gladly accepted. She offered the landlady a piece of the cake she had made that morning. Lucila Suarez tasted it and after a bite began to praise it in many ways. This is so delicious. The crusts melt in my mouth. And what a cream, what a soft cream. Actually, this cake is very easy to make. I can share the recipe with you, Victoria said. You are very talented, girl. Listen, the landlady perked up. Can you make the same cake, but bigger? I have an anniversary coming up in 2 weeks. I wanted to invite a lot of guests. I will pay you for the work and the ingredients, she added. To be honest, I don't know, confused Victoria. I've never baked big cakes, especially for money. You should, you're very good at it. I'm afraid to let you down, Victoria was still hesitant. Lucila Suarez patted her shoulder encouragingly. Surprisingly, Victoria agreed. She put her heart and soul into the anniversary cake for the landlady. The cake was perfect, and the cream was incredibly soft. Lucila Suarez walked around the cake, exclaiming that she had never seen such a beautiful cake and don't even want to cut it because it looks too good, but she can't wait to try it. As it turned out later, the main topic of conversation at that party was this magnificent cake. The guests wanted more and asked the birthday lady where she bought it. Lucila said that she ordered it from a friend. And then everyone demanded Victoria's phone number so that they could order the same cake. Unexpectedly for Victoria, people began to call her and order cakes for all sorts of events. At first, she was happy about the opportunity to earn some money, so she accepted all the orders. She made simple cakes and pastries, no tiramisu, cheesecake, or profiteroles. But her cakes with fresh berries, her waffle tubes with condensed milk, and her cherry pies got famous all over the city. The taste of childhood, satisfied customers said, ordering another cake. There were so many orders that she had to get a notebook to write down the details of all the orders. Gradually, she even began to say no to some clients. For example, sometimes there were 3 or more orders on the same date. As her client base expanded, Victoria began to think about hiring an assistant. However, Victoria could not bring her into the kitchen of her rented apartment. What if I opened a little pastry shop? She thought one day. At first, the idea seemed wild to Victoria, and she quickly rejected it. But then she kept thinking about her own bakery and even began to calculate how much it would cost her. She knew she didn't have enough money. Should she get a loan? No. Stupid idea. The bank will not approve a loan for an unemployed single mother. Asked Maximo for money, her sister kept chanting in her ear, "Call him. Tell him you will pay the money back gradually. He is an entrepreneur himself, so he should understand and support you." Eventually, Victoria began to think it was a wise decision. She could really borrow money from him and then give it back in a couple of months. She did not know Maximo's phone number, so she had to go directly to the company's office. It was good that her husband had quit there a long time ago, or he had been fired. She did not go into details. Meeting her ex-husband was the last thing she wanted right now. Everyone in the office obviously knew who she was. Her arrival had the effect of a bomb. As soon as she entered the building and made her way to the girl at the front desk, she immediately heard the whispering and noticed the taunts and leering glances. But Victoria had faced such a situation before, so she simply ignored it. Maximo's reception room was very cozy. Palm trees, an aquarium with exotic fish. His assistant also recognized the visitor. "Maximo Lorenzo has important telephone conversations with a foreign partner," she said grudgingly. "He's busy. You can put your request on paper, and I will give him your letter." "No, thank you," Victoria smiled sweetly. "I prefer to talk to him personally, face to face." "You will have to wait for a very long time," the assistant said with frank gloating. Victoria wanted to bite her. No one bothered to offer her a seat or at least a glass of water. Victoria, trying her best to remain friendly, sat down in the soft chair and folded her hands in her lap like a schoolgirl. She was ready to wait like that until morning, if necessary. "Sylvia, I'm going to see Toro." Maximo Lorenzo came out of the office hurriedly. He looked different, tired, serious, wearing a suit and tie. "I will be back in about 3 hours." Suddenly he saw Victoria and froze. She smiled timidly and stood up. "Hello." "Hello," he said as if he still didn't believe that Victoria wasn't just a hallucination, that she'd really come to his office. "How long have you been waiting?" "It's been 2 hours." Maximo looked angrily at the assistant. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Excuse me,